Hello, listeners, from Roy Demarev in Sam, speaking to you from Ekaterinburg, which is right on the border between Russia and Asia, on or near the Ural Mountains, where I have been named by a university, what they call in Russian a почетный professor. I guess we have to say honorary professor. So you can treat me with some respect now. I also taught a lesson, I gave a lesson, or two actually, in the Economics University in Ekaterinburg. So it's been quite a busy working time for me. But today I had time to go out and make a tour with a guide of Ekaterinburg itself. And I learnt many things, and I would like to share some of them with you. So we're going to put to one side the Antics Roadshow on both sides of the Atlantic, and you're going to get some comments from me about my trip here in Russia. Ekaterinburg has about 1.5 million inhabitants. It is the fourth, so they claim, the fourth largest city in Russia, but of course it's only a fraction of the size of Moscow and is much smaller than St. Petersburg and a bit smaller than Novosibirsk, which would occupy third place. It's a 2-hour plus flight from Moscow, and it's a place through which the prisoners of the Tsarist regime were sent on foot on the way to the lagers in Siberia, which were, of course, again used a great deal by the communist regime, and more recently, according to the BBC, by members of the Pussy Riot group, which was sent there after their song in the cathedral in Moscow. The centre of Ekaterinburg is very handsome, pretty. There is a building which looks remarkably like the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, and I asked what it was used for and was told it's empty, but it's where Putin stays if ever he comes to Ekaterinburg. I thought, what a waste of such a gorgeous building. Quite surprising. Other buildings are less gorgeous, but interesting to see what they were. They were built in a style called constructivism, and the idea was to build basically flats or offices which were very functional, which had big windows, but very little else, very plain and simple to build. They were put up in quite large numbers in the 30s, before the Second World War, while Stalin was at the height of his power, but doing very nasty things to the peasant population throughout the Soviet Union. One particular very large block of flats built to this constructivism style, but taking it to an extreme. The Soviet idea in those days was that women should not have to spend all their time in the kitchen cooking for their husbands. Far better that they were freed from these household chores so that they too could go and work in the factories. And so what do you do about food? Well, the answer then, and it's still there in this big block, is that you build flats. They were even 2-story flats, by the way, with the upper floor holding a bathroom and the lower floor being the living space, but no kitchen. So they got their food from a common kitchen or even a cafeteria with professional staff providing food all day long. So if you were hungry or your husband was hungry, you could send him down there to get a bite to eat at any time. The same facilities included a creche and all the things that you need that you don't have to travel very far to get. Now, these buildings, which had no kitchen, still have no kitchen. I don't quite know how people live in them, but they're big and attractive in other ways, so I guess they still go out to eat or just eat cold stuff occasionally at home. Anyway, at the risk of jumping around, let's go back in the past a bit and discover that Ekaterinburg was named after the wife of Peter the Great, and it was Peter the Great who basically said we've got to have a better or more reliable source of iron and also copper, and we need water for that, and they found water, and in the mountains they found the iron ore and so on, and thus he had Ekaterinburg built and named it after his wife. Now, there is also a saint, Ekaterina. She was much earlier, and so she is the saint of the city, and there's no church named after her or dedicated to her, although there is now a proposal to build such a church in her name, but it's heavily debated and is by no means sure it will be built. Yet there is a very large new cathedral church in Ekaterinburg, that which is devoted to the Tsar, Nicholas II, and his entire family, and indeed his servants, who were murdered by the Bolsheviks on the 17th of July 2018. He lived there, I think, for 73 days before the regicide or murder was committed. And the very place where that murder was is where they built the new cathedral, which is a church in two layers, oddly enough, as it were two separate churches in one building. And it's always very moving to go there because they devote a lot of photographs and explanations of what happened on that fateful day in 2018. And not just the Tsar was canonized, but the whole royal family, his wife and his daughters and young son, together with his doctor, they've all been declared to be saints by the Russian Orthodox Church. We finished the tour in a car with a guide of the city with quite a treat, which I would recommend to anybody who goes to Ekaterinburg. I mean, clearly you must see the cathedral dedicated to Tsar Nicholas and his family. You must also admire some very old and beautiful buildings, some quite old buildings according to this style of constructivism. And finally, you should do what I did, which is pay 250 rubles if it's in the afternoon, a bit later in the evening, and go to the top of the Vysotsky Tower. That is 54 stories high, but you can go as high as the 52nd and walk round, very windy, and it's a bit like being at the top of the Eiffel Tower. You've got a fantastic view in all directions. And then you can go down one flight to the 51st floor, where they have a very chic-looking restaurant, but where prices are actually very reasonable, and you eat extremely well. So I'm certainly going to go there again, because when you do get really good cooking in Russia, and it's not too expensive, then you found something well worth returning to. The building was named after Vladimir Vysotsky, who was a musician, a composer, poet, an actor, born in 1938, died in 1980, 42 or 43 years old. A bit of a dissident, but managed always to get away with it. And he was loved very much by the Russian people, and actually still is today. And so the people of Ekaterinburg chose that name for the building, even though there is no more a link between Vysotsky and Ekaterinburg than there is with many other towns throughout Russia. By the way, he married a French lady he was very fond of, and she's still around apparently in Paris, presumably quite an elderly lady now. So there he is. He's got a museum at the bottom of this tower named after him, and it's very interesting to see the museum, not just for the artiste, which is interesting, but to see a little bit more of the period of the epoch of the post-Second World War Russia, Soviet Union, which then was, and this fellow who dared to make up his own poems. And we did see some real examples of where they did the self typing up to get things around which were otherwise censored. Some of you might have heard of the expression samizdat, that we actually saw self-typed books of poems which were bound and circulated illicitly in the Soviet Union. Yet another thing well worth visiting in Ekaterinburg is the Museum of Fine Arts, because it has in it not only exhibitions of paintings, of course, and there's one now by an artist in Belgium called Azza, who's actually from Morocco but lives there, and he uses semi-tint, I think they call it. Basically, it's black on white, and he's very prolific. And there's this exhibition of, I guess, hundreds of his works, but I guess they go back to Belgium after this exhibition. But right there, when you enter the museum, is a most incredible iron pavilion. This is cast or wrought iron, very decorative. And it is a reproduction or repair, I think, plus some reproduction bits, of the original exhibition of the World Fair in Paris. I think it was around about 1890. And it was left hidden and covered up for many years. But they've rebuilt it, and it's just extraordinary. And what they've learned to do, or they learned then to do, I guess they can still do it in Ekaterinburg, is make things out of iron which you would normally only be able to make out of softer metals. Anyway, well worth seeing that too. So you see, this week has been one of quite hard work, some honours, lots of culture, and if I've encouraged any of you to go to Ekaterinburg to see what it's all about, then remember some of the things I've said to you in this short broadcast and enjoy them yourself. I guess I'll be back to talking to you about the Antiques Roadshow and how to invest or not to invest next weekend. Speak to you then.